Joined now by Jeremy Chan, senior analyst, China and Northeast Asia at Eurasia Group. He's speaking to us live from Washington, D.C. Jeremy, thanks for coming on today. The execution of this arrest warrant has begun. Investigators trying to arrest President Yoon as we speak. Now, reports say the CIO began this process at around 6:15 a.m. local time. So talk to us about the timing of this. Why today when the deadline is set for Monday?
So thank you for having me. Good question. The arrest or the detention warrant was issued on Tuesday, and it had basically a week-long duration. So it had to be served by Monday of next week. The investigators indicated originally they were going to serve it yesterday, Thursday, Korea time. It looks like they tried to buy themselves a little bit more time, potentially to liaise with some of Yoon's security services to make sure that they could enter the residence, for example, and execute the warrant. They appear to have selected the early hours of the day to do this, potentially trying to catch some of Yoon's supporters while they're still asleep, for example, or at least find fewer people there to resist. And as you indicated, there are 2,700 police officers who are mobilized around the residence right now. They're trying to create kind of a security cordon between the Yoon supporters and the official residence itself to allow these investigators to proceed into the residence.
Yeah, Jeremy, as we speak, we're looking at pictures of the compound, heavily cordoned off, police buses positioned to maintain order during this arrest. While the situation remains largely peaceful for now, is it too early to say whether it's under control or if it could escalate into a larger public disturbance?
It's absolutely too early to say that we are in truly uncharted waters. Nothing like this has ever happened in South Korea's history. And there are a sizable number of pro-Yoon supporters, believe it or not, who are vowing to not allow him to be detained. So we absolutely could see acts of violence, but it looks like so far that government forces are coordinating, that the presidential security services are allowing the CIO investigators to enter the residence, that the police are trying to keep that cordon, like I referenced earlier, between the public and Yoon, and we will know when Yoon is removed from the residence and potentially brought to the detention facility whether this was able to be pulled off peacefully.
Yeah, hard to fathom what's going through Mr. Yoon's mind right now, but given his defiant rhetoric, refusal to comply with legal summons, are they intended for a dramatic scenario to unfold? I mean, what do you think he's after? Is it to galvanize sympathy from his supporters?
Okay, so fundamentally, Yoon, who was never a politician before he was elected president in 2022, came up to the prosecutorial ranks. I think he views this as a legal dispute, fundamentally, this investigation into the insurrection charges, and he views it to be invalid. He believes that the CIO, which generally is supposed to prosecute corruption in senior officials, it does not have the legal authority to prosecute him for insurrection. That the parallel investigation being conducted by the Constitutional Court on the impeachment motion that was passed by the National Assembly on December 14th, that is a valid procedure, and he does intend to fight those charges, in the court of law. He believes what the CIO is trying to do, though, is an overreach of their legal authorities and therefore invalid, and so he will fight it tooth and nail to the bitter end.
Yeah, that's a great segue to my next question. A lawyer for Yoon says the CIO cannot request this arrest warrant because it doesn't have the authority to do so. Yoon's team also has filed an injunction to nullify it, but as we know, it's taking place right now. What's your take on all this? What impact is that injunction going to have?
I don't think it'll be particularly large. The detention warrant was issued by a Seoul municipal court. It looks like the higher legal authority of the Supreme Court is not going to rule one way or the other on whether the detention warrant is legal or valid. And it's worth reminding listeners out there that the reason why the CIO is sort of reaching for these, more extreme measures is because Yoon would not comply with 3 prior summonses for him to appear and just answer some of the questions that the CIO has, which has been tasked with investigating these, valid insurrection charges against the president. So the fact that Yoon is taking this kind of absolutist, scorched earth approach is forcing the CIO to take more aggressive measures, and so he's as guilty as any party in this whole drama in terms of escalating tensions and the potential for violence, frankly.
So, Jeremy, if he's taken into custody, this will mark the first time in South Korea's modern history that a sitting or impeached president could be detained. I mean, what would the immediate and long-term consequences be? I mean, could this arrest lead to further polarization, or might it provide a much-needed resolution to this crisis?
That's a great question. Our view is that there's a short-term and there's a long-term element to that question. The short-term, obviously, this is highly destabilizing. On the one hand, Yoon is no longer his presidential authorities have been suspended. We have an acting president who is not Yoon, who's running the day-to-day business of the government. So this won't affect the trains, the schools, the hospitals, et cetera. But it will be destabilizing insofar as he still is officially the president. He's not been removed through the more normal legal channel, which is the impeachment measure. And so you could potentially have Yoon being prosecuted or imprisoned while he's still the sitting president, if they can run this investigation fast enough through the courts to get ahead of the constitutional court ruling. But longer term, we believe that Yoon is almost assuredly to be removed from office, likely by March, which will then trigger a presidential election 60 days after his formal removal. So by roughly May of this year, we're probably going to see a new democratically elected president, likely of the opposition party, take office and be ruling over essentially a unified government. And so we think the longer term political trajectory for the country is actually neutral to potentially positive. So you have kind of two stories, the short term and the long term one in South Korea currently.
Okay, I want to talk about the unfolding situation we're watching now this morning. Members of Yoon's security team, they have blocked attempted police raids in the past. Supporters have been blocking access as well. The CIO has warned anyone trying to prevent Yoon's arrest could be prosecuted. Why haven't we seen any resistance today, and what fallout do you think those people could be facing?
So it looks like the delay between when the warrant was issued on Tuesday and the actual detention or the attempted detention of Yoon right now was to buy the CIO roughly 72 hours to coordinate with the authorities on the ground, meaning both the security services as well as the local police, to make sure that they could create the sort of physical and legal and procedural space to enter the residence and looks like remove Yoon from that residence, as well as any sort of other documents that they need to search as part of this detention warrant. So that's what the 3 days bought them. The reason why we're not seeing violence right now is because it looks like, at least for the short term, all of those relevant government agencies with competing mandates are in alignment on what needs to take place here. There are not any government authorities that are actively resisting the CIO's investigation. So that's why we don't see that. Fortunately, the pro-Yoon supporters, which are probably the most likely elements to escalate the violence in this particular scenario, have so far not been granted physical access to Yoon or the residents, and so therefore we've not seen greater levels of instability.
Jeremy, we want to talk about the impeachment trial. Only 2 of the 3 vacancies of justices have been filled by the acting president. What's the political significance of this 3rd vacancy, and how could it impact the final decision on Yoon's impeachment?
That's a great question. So we now have 8 of the 9 positions on the Constitutional Court filled. Only 6 are required to uphold the impeachment motion that was passed by the National Assembly on December 14th. So prior to acting President Che agreeing to appoint these other 2 justices on December 31st, we only had 6, which gave the opposition party very little room for error to uphold the motion. Now there are 8 justices, which means that the motion, which we always believed was going to pass, is much more likely to pass at some point. We also believe the Constitutional Court will be able to move with a little more speed at this point, too, likely handing down its decision by March at the latest. So we think this actually will smooth the levers and the process for the Constitutional Court. We don't believe that the 9th vacancy is particularly important at this point, and therefore the risk that acting President Che will also be impeached, as the previous acting president was on December 27th, is now lower than it was a few days ago.
A dynamic situation unfolding in Seoul this morning. Thank you so much for your insights today, Jeremy. Jeremy Chan, Senior Analyst, China and Northeast Asia at the Eurasia Group.